What if the truth you built your entire life upon suddenly cracked open, revealing someone you loved was never who you believed they were? What if the silence of a single woman held the weight of lives destroyed, secrets buried, and justice denied? This is the world John Grisham creates in The Widow, a place where tragedy lingers in the air like a storm that refuses to break, and where one woman's grief becomes the battleground for truth. It begins with a question that no one in a quiet Mississippi town has been brave enough to ask out loud. Who was Keith Russo, the local lawyer who was murdered late one night while working alone in his small office? The police had an answer, and they delivered it with confidence. They arrested a young black man named Quincy Miller, a man who had once been represented by Russo but lost a civil case that left him angry, desperate, and convinced the system had failed him. For the town, the story fit. Quincy had a motive. Quincy had reason. Quincy was easy to blame. And so Quincy went to prison, and no one thought much more about it, except the truth was never that simple. Grisham builds this world with sharp edges. Every detail matters. Every assumption cuts deeper than the last. And standing at the silent center of it all is the widow of the murdered lawyer. A woman shattered by loss. A woman holding answers she refuses to share. A woman whose quiet presence feels more dangerous than any raised voice. If grief has many forms, hers is made of steel and secrets. Years later, far away from the town that had already moved on, a man named Cullen Post begins to trace the threads of Quincy's case. Post is not the kind of hero who strides into chaos with arrogance. He carries his own scars, his own complicated past, but he works with a mission that never leaves him. A mission to find the innocent trapped behind bars by lies, poor lawyering, and systems that choose convenience over truth. When Post reviews Quincy's case, he sees cracks everywhere. Paper-thin evidence, witnesses who folded under pressure, a narrative built on fear instead of facts. And so the journey begins not with the roar of justice, but with a whisper. Grisham unfolds the story like a slow tightening of a noose. Post travels back to the town where Keith Russo died. He steps into the same streets where suspicion once spread like wildfire. He meets the widow, who greets him with a calm smile that never touches her eyes. Her pain seems frozen, as if time stopped on the night her husband died. She tells her story with careful precision. She talks about her late husband with affection. She talks about Quincy with certainty. Every word feels rehearsed, polished, guarded. And Post senses that beneath her grief lies something darker. As he digs deeper, the truth begins to shake loose. The murder of Keith Russo was not a random act of anger. It was a professional hit, a carefully planned execution with no connection to Quincy. The reason was a case Russo was working on involving a corruption scheme tied to dangerous people. Quincy had nothing to do with it. He had been the perfect scapegoat, the perfect distraction, a man with no power in a system that needed a quick answer. Yet, the one person who could destroy this lie is the widow. She knows her husband was not killed by a disgruntled former client. She knows the truth of the case he was working on, but she refuses to speak. Her silence protects the people who orchestrated the murder, people with money, influence, and the ability to make problems disappear. For her, staying quiet is survival. Post faces pressure from all sides. Returning to the town stirs up old resentments. The people there do not want the case reopened. They want their closure. They want the story they have repeated for years to remain true. But Post keeps pushing. He interviews witnesses long forgotten, digs into files gathering dust, and listens to voices that were ignored the first time. The deeper he goes, the more dangerous the truth becomes. And then, slowly, Grisham lets the darkness show its face. Post discovers that the widow's silence is not just fear, it is complicity. Her husband's murder was tied to financial dealings and a legal scheme she benefited from. She understood the risks. She understood the enemies. When the killers came for her husband, she understood the price that had to be paid. And in her grief, she made a choice. She protected herself. She protected her comfort. She protected her future. And she allowed an innocent man to lose decades of his life. The emotional weight of this moment is crushing. Post stands in the presence of a woman who appears fragile, but carries a destructive strength. The kind of strength that comes from choosing oneself over justice. The kind of strength that destroys quietly. Nothing about her screams villain. Her evil is ordinary. Her silence is lethal. But the truth has a stubborn rhythm. It demands to be heard. Post uncovers enough evidence to dismantle the entire case against Quincy. The courts eventually recognize the injustice and release him. Quincy walks out of prison not with joy, but with the hesitation of a man who has lost time he can never recover. The air outside feels strange. The sky feels too wide. Freedom feels both beautiful and cruel. Grisham lets you feel this moment in your bones. Quincy's freedom is not a victory march. It is a fragile breath, an uncertain step into a world that forgot him. And yet, it is real. It is earned. It is the result of one man's relentless pursuit of truth in a place that tried to bury it. But the widow never faces justice. She remains in the shadows of her quiet home, holding on to her secrets, protected by those who prefer silence over scandal. She lives her life untouched while Quincy rebuilds his from ashes. And this imbalance, this unresolved tension, is what Grisham leaves with the reader. A reminder that justice is not always clean. That truth does not always win in full. That some people walk free not because they are innocent, but because they are untouchable. As the story settles, the emotional core reveals itself. The Widow is not only about corruption or wrongful conviction. It is about the weight of silence, the choices people make in the darkness, the quiet ways lives can be destroyed when truth is treated like a threat. It is about a man who lost everything because someone else refused to open their mouth. And it is about the rare people, like Cullen Post, who choose to fight for those the world has given up on. The book lingers because it exposes a truth most people do not want to face. The justice system does not break in dramatic ways. It fractures in subtle ones, in rushed investigations, in closed minds, in unchallenged assumptions, in the refusal of ordinary people to question what they think they know. Quincy Miller became a victim of these fractures, and though he walks free, the scars stay. By the end, you feel the pull to look at your own world with sharper eyes, to question stories that feel too convenient, to notice the people who are easy to blame, to recognize how silence can shape destinies. Grisham gives you more than a thriller. He gives you a mirror. If this story moved something inside you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that truth often lives in uncomfortable places. And if you want more journeys like this one, stories that challenge your assumptions and pull you into the human heart of justice, stay connected and step into the next chapter with us.